It's been 3 hours. Not days, not weeks. Just 3 hours. And yet, it already feels like silence is screaming through your chest. You checked your phone 5 times in the last 30 minutes. You weren't even being obvious about it. You pretended you were scrolling Instagram. You pretended you were bored. You pretended like you didn't care. But deep down, you weren't checking for memes. You were checking for him. You wanted to believe that maybe he's just busy. That maybe he left his phone in the other room. That maybe he's at the gym or caught up with work. That maybe it's not you. But here sits the thing. You always do this. You always give the benefit of the doubt, even when doubt is the only thing showing up for you. The silence after closeness, it hits differently. Because the night before, he made you laugh. The conversation flowed. Maybe he even said something sweet. Maybe he even said he missed you. And now, it's like you're just floating in space, like the moment never happened, like you never happened. That's the part that hurts. The confusion, the gap between his words and his actions, the way he opens the door and closes it just as quickly. And here you are, replaying the last message you sent. Haha, you steer so silly. Was that too much? Should you have been more mysterious? Less available? You start second-guessing your own softness, your own presence, your own heart. And that's the part that breaks you the most. Because somehow a man's silence has the power to make you question if you're lovable. Why does it always feel like you're too much or not enough? Why does it always feel like you care a little more? Why does it always feel like you're trying to decode a language that keeps rewriting its rules? You didn't plan on feeling this deep, but now you're lying in bed, scrolling through messages, remembering all the small things he said, and trying to find meaning in the nothingness. Maybe you asked yourself this before. Is he testing me? Did I say something wrong? Is he losing interest? Or is this just how men are? But no matter how you twist it, the ache stays. And the hardest part isn't set at the silence. It's the meaning you attach to it. You not just waiting for a message. You're still waiting to feel wanted, to feel chosen, to feel like you matter to someone without needing to perform for it. You've been through this pattern before. You meet someone, you connect. You let your guard down slowly. You let your energy soften, and just when you feel safe, it shifts. They pull away. They delay the replies. They get vague. And instead of asking yourself, why is he acting like this? You start asking, what did I do wrong? That's how deep your empathy goes. That's how hard you try to understand other people, even when it hurts you. And here sits the thing. You stir not crazy. You sit not needy. You stir not overthinking. You sit just emotionally aware. You don't ignore your gut. And your gut is telling you something's off, but you don't want to be that girl, the one who overreacts. So you wait, and wait, and wait. You keep pretending you steer fine. You post a story that you hope he sees. You act busy. You tell your friends, it's whatever. It's not even that into him. But the truth is, you set her in limbo. Not heartbroken. Not committed. Just quietly aching for clarity. That in between, it's emotional torture. Because when a man ghosts you after giving you attention, it's not just silence, it's psychological whiplash. It's the high of connection followed by the crash of uncertainty. And what hurts more than anything is not knowing how to respond. Do you pull away too? Do you reach out and risk looking desperate? Do you give him a taste of his own medicine? Or do you sit there, overanalyzing every text, every emoji, every timestamp? Let's be real. You don't want to manipulate. You don't want to force anything. You just want someone who means what he says. Someone who doesn't disappear when it gets real. Someone who chooses you with certainty, not convenience. But it feels like men don't know how to handle a woman like you. A woman with depth. A woman with softness and substance. A woman who doesn't just want attention, she wants connection. And maybe that's why you're here now, listening to this. Not because you need advice, but because you need someone to put words to what you're feeling. So here it is. Believe it or not, when he doesn't call or message you, it means something. It means something real. Something deeper than just he sips busy. Something that has nothing to do with your worth, and everything to do with his patterns, his maturity, and his intentions. You don't deserve to be confused. You don't deserve to be in limbo. You don't deserve to keep offering your heart to someone who disappears into the silence whenever it suits him. You deserve clarity. You deserve consistency. This isn't about texting first or who's chasing who. It's about emotional safety. So the next time he disappears, before you spiral, before you blame yourself, before you shrink, come back to this truth. You are not hard to love. He's just not consistent enough to handle a woman who is. And that's not your burden to carry. Let's talk about the part you don't say out loud. The part behind the silence. The part behind your strength. The part you carry quietly, without telling anyone, not even your closest friends. Because even they say things like, just ignore him. Don't give him your energy. He's not worth it. But even deeper down, something still aches. Something still waits. Something still wonders. But what if? What if it's not about him? It's about something much older. Something rooted in your emotional DNA. You see, when a man pulls away, it's not just about the lack of a message. It's about the story that silence tells inside your nervous system. A story that whispers, you itch too much. You want too much. You need too much. And when that whisper echoes long enough, it becomes a belief. A quiet, dangerous belief. I am not enough. And this belief, it didn't start with him. Maybe when you were a child who had to work for love. Maybe when you learned that love only came after proving yourself. After being good, after being quiet, after being useful. So when someone goes quiet on you now, it's not just inconvenient, it's triggering. Because silence feels like rejection. Rejection feels like abandonment. And abandonment feels like death to your nervous system. But no one sees that part. They just see you checking your phone. They don't see the storm beneath your skin, the battle between your head and your heart, the way your logic says, he's just not the one, let it go. But your heart says, why does it always feel like this? Why does it hurt so much to be unwanted? You may be independent. You may be successful. You may be the strong friend, the healer, the one who holds others. But even strong women break under emotional starvation. Even empowered women ache for safe, consistent love. Even brilliant minds can be trapped in emotional loops. It's that you kept hoping he would. And in that hoping, you stopped hearing your own voice. You silenced your needs. You shifted the blame inward. Because you thought, maybe I said too much. Maybe I shouldn't have been so available. But let's be honest. If love makes you feel like you need to be less of yourself just to be kept, is it love? Or is it emotional labor dressed up as romance? Not just when you're being mysterious. Not just when you're holding back. Not just when you're hard to get. But when you're honest, vulnerable, soft. It says everything about him, and nothing about your worth. Let's go even deeper. When he doesn't message you, it doesn't just leave a silence in your phone, it creates a gap in your sense of safety. Because attention for you isn't about ego. It sips about emotional reassurance. It's about knowing that you're not the only one investing, not the only one caring, not the only one showing up. That sits what most people don't sit understand. They think you sit obsessed. They think you sit over-attached. They don't realize you're just tired of carrying it all, tired of being the one who always sees it through. And yet you said are afraid to ask for more, because every time you ask, you been labeled needy or too sensitive. So you shrink. You pretend you sit okay. You lower your volume just to keep someone around. But here sits what I want you to hear. You are not asking for too much. You're asking for what you deserve. Clarity, consistency, and care. You are not being needy. You start asking not to be left in emotional limbo. You are not overreacting. You are responding to inconsistency, which is a psychological threat to secure attachment. You are not weak for wanting connection. You are human. You are wired for closeness. You are meant to love and be loved. You learn to decode silence, to find meaning in seen but not replied, to interpret tone from one-word answers, to accept breadcrumbs and call it a meal. But today, let's stop pretending that this is okay. Let's stop normalizing inconsistency. Let's stop calling this modern dating and start calling it what it is. Emotional neglect, disguised as casualness. And if no one told you this yet, let me say it. Your body, your heart, your nervous system, they're not built for breadcrumbing. You don't crave drama. You crave intimacy. Real, safe, reciprocal intimacy. And it's not your fault that this feels like grief. You don't matter enough to be chosen. You were just giving sacred parts of yourself to someone who doesn't have the capacity to honor them. There's nothing wrong with you for caring deeply. There's nothing wrong with you for being disappointed when silence answers love. And if you're feeling tired, emotionally tired, that makes sense. Because emotional inconsistency is exhausting. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you chase validation. It makes you forget who you are. The one who waits for a name to pop up. The one who replays conversations just to find where she went wrong. She sits not pathetic. She sits just scared. Scared of being unchosen again. Scared of giving more than she'll get. Let her rest. Let her breathe. Let her feel safe again with you. Because you don't need someone else to call or text to feel worthy. That worth, it was always yours. Even in the silence. Even in the waiting. Even in the doubt. You never been too much. You've always just been giving too deeply to those who couldn't meet you there. It starts not just him, and it sits not just now. That feeling, that slow sinking ache in your chest when he disappears, it didn't start with him. It sits as older, quieter. It began long before this man ever entered your life. You know how to live without attention. You know how to pretend that everything is fine when your world is spinning. Why? Because you've done it before. You learned how to emotionally survive in uncertainty. Think back, not just to your last relationship, but further, to when you were little. To when affection came with conditions: be good, be quiet, don't cry, don't need too much. To when connection meant walking on eggshells trying to please the person whose love you depended on. That's where the pattern began. You didn't just learn to love. You learned to work for love. You learned that attention wasn't a right, it was a reward. You learned that silence wasn't rejection, it was a challenge. You learned to mistake inconsistency for passion, to confuse anxiety with love. So when someone gives you affection and then pulls away, it doesn't feel unfamiliar, it feels like home. Not because it's safe, but because it's known. This is the heartbreaking part. You've been reenacting an emotional pattern that began in your earliest relationships. Not because you want to, but because your subconscious is trying to resolve a wound that never healed. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is what that means. You stir not just choosing men, you stew choosing unfinished emotional business, men who disappear when you need presence, men who mirror the unpredictability you experienced growing up, the feeling that love is temporary, fragile, or inconsistent. That SIP's not your fault. It SIP's a survival response. Your nervous system is trying to complete the story. So you think, if I can make him stay, maybe I can prove I was always worth staying for. And that SIP's where the addiction begins. Not to the man, but to the chase, to the emotional gamble, to the hope, because even though it hurts, that hope keeps you alive. Hope that this time will be different. Hope that you can finally rewrite the story. But here sits the painful truth. You don't heal the past by bleeding in the present. You don't fix emotional abandonment by surviving more of it. You don't become worthy by chasing the unavailable. You already are. Let's look closer at the cycle. He gives attention. It feels exciting, validating, full of promise. He pulls away. You feel confused, anxious, triggered. You overthink, start adjusting your behavior, blaming yourself. You chase emotional closure, not for him but for yourself. He gives just enough to keep you hopeful. The cycle resets. This is called an anxious avoidant trap. You crave closeness. He fears it. He steps back. The more you feel disconnected, the more intensely you reach, and the more he feels smothered, the more he retreats. It has nothing to do with your worth. It sits a nervous system mismatch, and it's exhausting. But it sits not just about attachment styles. It sits about unresolved grief. The grief of never being fully met, of always giving more than you receive, of always hoping that love will feel like peace and ending up with chaos instead. So let me ask you something, gently. Was your love ever modeled with consistency? Were you taught that love arrives and stays? Because the way we first experience love becomes the blueprint, not the conscious one, the emotional one, the one that whispers, if you just don't scare him off, maybe he will choose you. But listen to me now. You are not here to perform for love. You are not here to manage someone's fear of intimacy. You are not here to shrink your needs into something more palatable. You are here to be met. Fully. Softly. Without earning it. And you won't find that by chasing men who disappear. You won't find that in the silence of someone's unread message. You won't find that in the emotional roller coaster of being hot and cold with someone who isn't ready. You still find it when you say, I don't chase clarity anymore. I create it by walking away from confusion. I don't beg for presence anymore. I offer my love to those who can hold it. Not by fixing him, not by winning him, not by waiting, but by finally bravely asking yourself, what part of me is still trying to earn love I should always had? What version of me keeps confusing anxiety for love, and why? Who taught me that silence was normal in love, and are they still leading my choices? This is how healing begins. Not with answers from him, but with honesty from you, because he might never explain the silence. But maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe the real answer is this. His silence revealed your oldest wound, and now you finally see it. Let's stop avoiding it. Let's say what you've been afraid to say, even to yourself. You keep telling your friends, I'm just confused. But you not. You stir not confused. You know exactly what's happening. You just don't want it to be true. You don't want to admit that the silence is your answer, that his distance is a decision, that his inconsistency isn't an accident, it's a reflection of his comfort, not his confusion. Because admitting that would mean the fairy tale is over. It would mean the dream has cracked. It would mean facing what you never wanted to be true. He sits okay without you. And worse, he sits not worried about losing you. That truth? It cuts like glass. Not because you need a man to feel worthy, but because you loved him in a way he never had to earn. You loved him purely. You showed up. You didn't play games. You gave. And now all you're left with is space, a silence he's not rushing to fill. And that makes you question everything. But let's go deeper. Let's go into the truth you really don't want to face. You don't just miss him. The future version of you, softer, loved, chosen. The image of being wanted back. Finally, the emotional home you thought you were building. You didn't fall for the man. You fell for the hope. You fell for the moments where he almost showed up, where he made you feel seen for a second, then vanished into that familiar silence that now keeps you awake at night. And here sits what hurts even more. You made excuses for him. You edited your truth so it wouldn't scare him. You swallowed your questions, your needs, your instincts, just to keep the peace. Because part of you thought, if I am patient, if I stay calm, if I don't push too hard, maybe he'll see how rare I am. Maybe he'll realize I've them different. Maybe he'll come back this time for real. But what if he won't sit? What if this is who he is? What if he's not coming back? Not because of anything you did, but because he was never here for the same reasons. That's the truth most women avoid. Not because they stir weak, but because they hopeful, because they want to believe in love, because they don't want to feel like all that care, all that openness, all that believing was for nothing. But here sits the hardest truth I can give you, not with words, with silence. And believe it or not, that silence is communication. It sets just not the kind you wanted, but it sticks clear, painfully clear. Because a man who wants you shows up. He doesn't leave you wondering. He doesn't go days without contact and call it space. He doesn't send mixed signals and call it honesty. He doesn't act interested on Monday and disappear by Thursday. That's not emotional struggle, that's emotional starvation. So let's stop hoping he'll change. Let's stop writing novels in our heads based on texts that never came. Let's stop turning his crumbs into signs. What if you stopped explaining his silence and started honoring your worth? What if, instead of asking, "Why hasn't Steve messaged me?" you asked, "Why am I still available to someone who makes me feel invisible?" You betrayed your gut, which already knew. You've betrayed your standards, the ones you promised yourself you'd never lower again. You betrayed your heart, the one that keeps whispering, "This doesn't feel like love." But you stayed, in the hoping, in the maybe, because leaving feels like grief, and staying feels like hope. That's what keeps you spinning. You stir not chasing him, you stir chasing the potential of him, the imagined version. The one who shows up in your head, not your life. The one who messages when you dream, but not when you need. And that version of him doesn't exist. He's not coming to save you. He's not going to wake up and realize he almost lost a queen, because people don't change unless they want to. And love doesn't grow where communication doesn't live. So let's stop dressing wounds with denial. Let's stop romanticizing inconsistency. Let's name it. If he doesn't message you, it's not because he's scared. It's not because he's busy. It's not because he sits taking time to think. It sups because you set not a priority to him. Because real men don't sit confuse you. Real men don't sit, vanish and reappear. They show up. They make space. They answer, even when it sits inconvenient. You steer not asking for too much. And the longer you keep asking him with your silence, with your waiting, with your hoping, with your suffering, the more you delay the healing that only truth can bring. So here it is. Stop calling emotional starvation patience. Stop calling confusion chemistry. Stop calling silence mystery. Start calling it what it is. Emotional unavailability, avoidant behavior, and compatibility with your needs. And stop seeing yourself through the eyes of someone who couldn't see your worth. Because you already know. You know you sit been bending. You know you sit been waiting. You know you've been playing it cool when your heart is begging to be held. And you sit tired. Tired of pretending this is normal. Tired of acting like you're okay with almost being loved. So now it sits time. Time to say the truth out loud. You deserve someone who doesn't make you question your place in their life. Let Stex take a breath now. A different kind. A softer one. A breath that says, I don't need to chase clarity from someone who chooses confusion. Because up until this moment, your energy has been orbiting around one question. Why hasn't he reached out? But now let Sits turn the question around, lovingly, wisely, and ask, why have I kept reaching inward to fix something that wasn't Sit mine to carry? You see, there sits no power in self-blame. There sits only power in self-return. This is not about pretending you don't sit care. This is not about playing reverse psychology games or cutting him off cold. This is about reclaiming your energy, reclaiming your peace, reclaiming the part of you that forgot she doesn't have to do anything to be worthy of love that stays, because he sits not the story. You are. He may be the trigger, but he sits not the lesson. You can hold space for your emotions without acting on them. You can want connection and still choose boundaries. You can ache for closeness and still protect your peace. Let's talk about that for a moment. Peace. You have been taught to associate love with chaos, with emotional highs and lows, with adrenaline, with confusion. But that sits not love. That sits nervous system dysregulation. That sits survival mode attachment. Real love is boring in the best way. It sits not about chasing texts. It sits about knowing and being known. So what if we let go of the story that says you need to prove something? What if you stopped performing emotional acrobatics for someone who can't even reply? And instead, what if you gave yourself permission to detach? Yes, detach. Not from hope, not from love. Because here sits the truth. You can care and still walk away. You can miss him and still respect yourself enough not to chase silence. You've been trying to control his behavior through your own shrinking, adjusting, suppressing. But love doesn't live there. Love lives in honesty. And the honest thing is, this doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel stable. It doesn't feel reciprocal. So here sits a new mantra for you. Soft, quiet, strong. If I have to guess, I choose to go. Let that settle into your chest. Let that feel like a door opening, not closing. Because guesswork is not love. It sits survival. And you done enough surviving. Let's talk now about detachment. Detachment is not revenge. It sits not coldness. It sits not pretending. Detachment is sacred. It sits saying, I release the need to monitor someone else's readiness. I release the need to be the exception in someone's emotional confusion. I release the need to prove myself to someone who can meet me. This is not about blaming him. And it sits not about blaming you. It sits about seeing clearly. You are not weak for wanting it to work. You are not broken for missing someone who gave you only half of what you needed. But hope without clarity becomes self-harm. And love without direction becomes self-abandonment. So if you feel the urge to text him, pause. Ask yourself, what do I actually want from this? Validation? Relief? Closure? What if you gave that to yourself? Instead of waiting for a hey at 11:42 p.m., what if you gave yourself rest? Instead of performing emotional CPR on someone unresponsive, what if you pulled all that energy back to your chest, like a tide returning to the sea? You don't need to block him out of anger. You can simply mute him out of peace. Not because he sits the enemy, but because your nervous system has had enough. Because your soul is tired of sitting in rooms where she's not spoken to. Here, something else. No one tells you. You don't have to stay emotionally available to someone just because you once felt a spark. Sparks don't build relationships. Consistency does. Safety does. Clarity does. And if the silence hasn't given you that, then you give it to yourself. Right now, you sit not powerless. You stir powerful. Because you seen the pattern. You heard your inner voice. You named the truth. Now you get to choose. Not to send that extra message. Not to interpret his silence anymore. Not to fantasize about his return. You get to say, I deserve someone who chooses me out loud, not in moments but always. Let go of the urge to prove. Let go of the waiting room. Let go of the woman who thought she had to suffer to be loved. She did her best. She believed. She tried. She can rest now. And from that rest, something new will grow. Because the most powerful moment in a woman's life is when she stops blaming herself for someone else. Sips silence and starts hearing her own voice again. The phone stopped lighting up. The sound of a message no longer breaks the silence. And yet, somehow, you're still here. Breathing, healing, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. You used to stare at your screen, waiting for something to make the ache stop. One word, one emoji. But that message didn't come, and the silence grew, and your heart didn't break all at once. You thought that the right thing to do was hold space for someone who might come back. You thought if you just stayed kind, patient, soft, maybe he'd see. Maybe he remember. But he didn't steer. And there in the stillness of that realization, something else emerged. Not bitterness. Not rage. Not even sadness anymore. Just stillness. And inside that stillness, truth. He just not choosing you. And that truth, it hurts. But it also sets you free. Because love doesn't live in maybe. It doesn't survive in silence. It doesn't bloom in emotional drought. It thrives where it sits watered, where it sits seen. And he didn't speak it. Not the way you needed. Not the way you deserved. But that doesn't mean you weren't worthy of it. It just means he wasn't the one who could meet you in that depth. And that not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of his readiness. You waited. You gave the benefit of the doubt. You stayed soft in the face of inconsistency. And none of that was a mistake. Proof that you love deeply. That you show up. That you carry sincerity in a world that's forgotten how to mean what it says. But now something in you is shifting. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But like a quiet door closing in your heart. You stir no longer angry. You stir no longer performing strength. You stir just done. Done offering your energy to question marks. Done tying your worth to someone's response time. Done shrinking your light to keep someone from walking away. And in that quiet ending you begin again. You come back to yourself, to your heartbeat, to your breath, doesn't chase, doesn't explain, doesn't perform. You return to the woman you were before you made someone else the center of your emotional orbit. And she is luminous. She doesn't need the noise of a message to feel whole. She doesn't wait for love to arrive in half measures. She doesn't keep rereading silence, hoping it turns into a sentence. She knows that when love is real, it shows up, it calls, it stays, and until then, she doesn't settle. So tonight, if your phone stays quiet, let it. Let the silence be sacred. Let it remind you of all the noise you no longer need. And when your heart asks, but what if he comes back? You can smile and say, by then, I once set to be waiting, because the version of you who used to ache for his attention, she sips already gone, and the woman who sips rising in her place. She doesn't chase. She attracts what sips aligned. It doesn't mean you weren't set good enough. It means you finally saw the truth and chose yourself anyway. And that sips the message that matters most.